Good morning. Most of the headlines we see for the trade wars concern tariffs. Almost every day there's news about the tariffs and how the ground is shifting under the feet of importers who have ships on the water or packages in a warehouse, and they've just been informed that they need to pay more if they want to have them delivered. So there is a human interest aspect to that story that's always compelling, and journalists can always find people to talk to with strong opinions on both sides who can fill up a news article or a few minutes of broadcast time. Those stories and points of view are interesting, but they are much less important than what's happening at the top of the supply chain on the raw materials side. China and the BRICS countries own the top of the supply chain for just about everything. Tariffs don't matter up there, and it's they who decide whether and where anything gets made. It's one of the most critical existential issues today, and just a handful of journalists and researchers are paying attention, and those who are tend to work in industry or business media exclusively. So here are two charts on tungsten and which countries have it. The Bloomberg chart is by tonnage, the production estimate from the U.S. Geological Survey dated last year. The bottom chart is the percentage breakdown by country, but they took out North Korea and lumped it in with rest of world. If you're a North American or European and you're scrolling down this list and you're considering how friendly these countries are, or if you're an American defense contractor and you're looking for tungsten to build weapons systems, there's no good news here at all. Here's another that makes things even worse if you happen to be a Pentagon procurement official. It's the chart of everyone else who's looking for tungsten besides you. 30% of all the tungsten goes to automotive sectors, then mining, then industrial, then energy. 8% of it goes to construction. Aerospace is also at 8%, and a good chunk of that is in defense. And defense as a standalone is at 10%. So there are lots of people in a lot of places who are looking for tungsten to build cars or semiconductors or industrial products. Another challenge is here. The demand for tungsten is rising fast, but the supply is not. And here's where all the supply is for now. China, Russia, Vietnam, and North Korea are neighboring countries to China and friendly ones. Russia produces as much tungsten as Europe and the United States combined, and China's production is 33 times Russia's. China and its neighbors then have a near monopoly on tungsten. And just like with all the other materials that are critical to high-end manufacturing and semiconductors and energy and defense, China and the other BRICS can employ strategies and supply chains that make tariffs irrelevant. I mean that tariffs can be tit for tat. Country A raises their tariffs from 10% to 20%, so country B can do the same. Or country A puts a higher tariff on cars, hurting suppliers in country B, and country B responds by putting tariffs on whiskey because country A sells a lot of booze to B. But in these raw materials, other countries have no recourse. There is no answer. We don't have tungsten in this case, and neither do our friends. Tungsten buyers in North America are shocked, those are their words, in a state of disbelief after Beijing put tungsten on the export ban list. It's the same policy that China previously announced for gallium, germanium, and antimony, and that caused prices on those to go vertical. Analysts believe here the same is coming for tungsten next. China consumes here most of the tungsten that it mines, and going back to this chart, it makes sense. China is the world's biggest car market, the biggest factory sector, construction, huge in aerospace. So China is now officially targeting exports of any of its tungsten that can be used in Western defense systems. The recent announcement is surprising, it says here, and I wonder why. Why was it surprising that they would do the same thing for tungsten that they've already done for gallium, germanium, antimony, and graphite? That's not a rhetorical question. I want to know why any supply chain research analyst is surprised at this point. Anyway, he's in good company. Almonte stock is up 41% in 2 days as investors are realizing we don't have any tungsten, but everybody needs it. Our economy, manufacturing, defense, everything depends on tungsten. So things are bad now in the tungsten markets back home, now that China has a new export ban on it. And we should assume that Beijing can call up their friends in Moscow and Pyongyang and Hanoi and get their tungsten coming this direction too, to China instead of anywhere else. But they have another arrow in their quiver also. China currently has a ban on imports of tungsten scrap. The recycling and re-refining of tungsten is a messy and dirty industry. But if China were to allow it again, China would suck in huge supply of tungsten from global markets overnight. There would be almost nothing left for buyers anywhere else, and it would create a situation where our companies would simply be unable to get it at all. He concludes with a question that is rhetorical for now, but probably won't be next month. How much will China tighten the screws? The news today is bad, and he thinks tomorrow's news is going to get worse. The United States has not mined tungsten for a decade, and we get most of our tungsten from China. There are mining projects here that may come online in the next 40 months or so, but the United States lacks domestic supplies. This CEO is hoping for government funding to support more tungsten mining. The Pentagon is partnering with a couple of Canadian companies to develop projects there. Fireweed Metals was awarded $15 million for a mine in the Yukon, but it's not very far along. That funding will just go toward a feasibility study to see if it can be mined there at all. There's other Pentagon funding which is promised to other exploration companies, but this is too little too late. It takes tens of millions of dollars to build new mines and years to get them surveyed and prospected and roads built and staffed and producing. The government help that these tungsten company CEOs is looking for. That should have happened 10 years ago. Instead of building up our tungsten industry, we shut it down. The trade wars are being waged where economies perceive their country's advantages to be. The United States is the world's largest consumer market, and so tariffs are employed there, which means consumers in the United States will pay higher prices for things not made in the United States. But China and the BRICS are the world's natural resources economies. They're waging a supply chain war, and they're using outright export bans. That means that our companies cannot get raw materials at all. The Pentagon is a money no object customer, and they will have the first call on any gallium or germanium or tungsten that they can get their hands on. And now they can't get it. This is West Lake in Hangzhou, Zhejiang province. Be good.